Everyone. My name is Malcolm Graham, the chairman of the City of Charlotte Economic Development Committee, and I'd like to call the Monday, March 7th meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Happy Monday in Charlotte. We will start by introducing those who are visiting with us virtually, our council members, and any staff that may be online virtually, and then we will introduce those in the room. Council members Wallington and Ashmere are on their way, so we do have a quorum. It is 12:03, and I think we should get started. So let's do that, starting with council members who are virtually with us.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Greg Phipps, committee member.
Any staff that's with us virtually?
David was on there. Yeah.
David Green, I'm working with Allison.
This is Matt Prosser with Economic Planning Systems.
Welcome, everyone, and we will now introduce those who are with us in 280, starting with the newest member of the team.
Robin Stewart, leader from Bank of America working on corridors.
Christina Thigpen, Deputy Director, Economic Development.
Todd DeLong, Economic Development.
Tracy Dodson, City Manager's Office.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Allison Craig, Interim Planning Director.
Okay, well, we have a very light but meaningful agenda today, and I will turn the meeting over to our Assistant Manager for Economic Development, Tracy Dodson, to introduce the agenda items for us, and let's get to work.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham. We only have 2 items on the agenda today, and really just opportunity for discussion. This first item, the corridors of opportunity, Councilmember Phipps, this is all for you. I heard you when you said you didn't know everything that was going on the corridors, and so we wanted to make sure that we bring back to you all on a regular basis what all is happening across the corridors. At the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about kind of our structure internally and externally as we're moving forward, to give you some insights into how we're starting to think around that. And then we will jump over to Allison and team on the UDO economic impact analysis, kind of giving you a little bit of just what's coming, right, in the process that they're going through and schedule moving forward. So with that, I will jump into corridors of opportunity unless anybody had any questions about the agenda.
Move forward.
Great, thank you. So I'm glad that we have the team in here that we have today, because corridors of opportunity, while you might see myself or Todd in the economic development space, it is a large city team. If we could go to the next slide. And we all know that we've been working in corridors for a very long time. All we have really done is try to think differently about our investments and try to organize differently to be more cross-collaborative in this approach so that we can, so that the community can see impact sooner rather than later. As everybody knows, we have 6 corridors. We'll talk about how we're approaching these corridors. We have found it's really hard to be doing significant and meaningful work in 6 corridors at one time. And so we're trying to set up a system that allows us to stay in the corridors, and we're not going from one corridor where you have, you know, a lot of emphasis in a year and then go to the next corridor and leave one behind. Councilmember Graham's heard me say that. We spent a lot of time last year on Beatties Ford, and we're not going to forget Beatties Ford. We're going to continue the momentum in Beatties Ford. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is an all-in approach, and this is really trying to demonstrate and organize in a way that we can best see the city's commitment to support equitable investment, holistic neighborhood revitalization, and the ability for long-time residents to stay in place. The work is much more than that, but that kind of starts to capture what it is. What's different really has been this cross-collaborative approach and how we deploy our resources to really get to the impact that the community wants to see. Next slide, please. So this cross-collaborative approach, we don't get there unless we're thinking about how we support the corridor, the resources that are in the corridors, how we strengthen the business opportunities as well as the resident opportunities, and ensure for short-term and long-term success. It is conversations, the corridors don't see success unless the conversations are much bigger than just what the city does. We do infrastructure, we do safety. But this is really about moving a corridor forward in so many other ways as well. But organizing internally to begin with, having conversations about infrastructure and public-private projects as well as housing together, I believe has led to better investments so far in this initiative. And then we have to expand beyond, right? How do we bring in education conversations to it, or health and human services conversations to it? I tell people all the time, it's great to put jobs on the corridor, but if the barriers to the jobs aren't eliminated, we're not doing ourselves any favors. Next slide. So you've heard me say that, we're organizing differently, but it's really to better deliver to the community. The goal is not to leave the community behind in this and keep the community engaged and stay community focused and data driven. We have a process that we go through when we look at these corridors, and the planning book, the playbook process. Everybody's heard me kind of be very critical of it. Going out and engaging the community is something that's been very important in the process. To me, what we're really shifting in all of this work that's slightly different is the implementation process. And as I've talked to you, Councilmember Graham, are we having the right conversations when we're going out and doing the playbook process? But really what it comes to is, are we developing the right implementation process in this and how we implement what we find in front of us? We do engage the community. We do a stakeholder study and some community visioning. How we then organize all of that is, I think, what we have to continue to fine tune as we move through our corridors. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't get by today without talking a little bit about each corridor and what we're doing in each corridor, because there is stuff really going on in every corridor. If we could go to the next slide. We'll start with Beatties Ford. That's where we started last year, or the year before last, I guess. If we can go to the next slide. And if you all remember, when we started the conversation about Beatties Ford, we said that we wanted to be geographically focused in specific areas. The corridor is a long corridor. There's no way the community can see change and see a difference if we spread our investments across the entire corridor and aren't thinking about how they come together. So we've been geographically focused between 5 Points, Oaklawn, and LaSalle, and then we do have some corridor-wide initiatives. 5 Points is very different than LaSalle, and how we've approached those have been different. 5 Points, there's projects with the plaza that we're finishing, projects that we've invested in public-private projects, Sankofa, where Diana's been very successful in her tenants there, as well as some other infrastructure improvements that we've been looking at through there, and other P3 projects at 5 Points. At Oaklawn, we have Street Eats that we've done, and the Ritz at Washington Heights, and we had the governor out there 2 weeks ago. So it's been, again, a different level of investment, but more work there. Urban Arboretum Trail is in progress. We have a staying in place pilot that's happening in this area. Placemaking around the treatment plant, and intersection enhancements at Oaklawn and Beatties Ford as well. In addition, we have ongoing conversations with the developer for the Excelsior Club, as well as another developer at this intersection. We know that parking is an issue here, seems to be what trips everybody up, and so we've been looking and discussing what we can do to help solve some of the issues there. And then at LaSalle Street, we know that eFix, for example, has 2 projects. We have intersection enhancements that are coming. We have a traffic signal that's coming to Catherine Simmons, as well as a sidewalk improvement. We have a housing project. We have alternative violence in urban Maine that will be ongoing as well. And so this intersection's gonna look drastically different in a matter of a couple of years. And then corridor-wide, you'll see that we have Wi-Fi. We're looking at the bike boulevard and matching grants that will continue to stay in place. That very last bullet, we are targeting some very strategic land acquisitions in a couple of corridors and have property under contract. We're in the very early stages of bringing something to you all. We're not quite ready there, but we're just investigating several pieces of property along the corridors that we believe can have multiple wins or check multiple boxes, that as we look at what those could be, what they could be, and then what they might be solving for. So with Beatty's Ford, we can go to the next slide. You can see this is Beatty Ford and LaSalle. And again, if we start to think about how we look at public-private partnerships, how we look at infrastructure, how we look at housing, all of these pieces combined into one area, again, you can really start to see a change in our corridors. Before I go on to West Boulevard, I just wanted to stop and see if anybody had any questions.
Any questions from the council related to Beatty's Ford Road? I'm very, very glad you read my mind in terms of breaking them down by different corridors. So this is exactly my first questions. And since I am the district representative, I'm going to
I
ask.
knew you had some questions.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions. One, just want to remind the public of the grand opening of the Five Point Plaza Park this coming Saturday, which is going to be a great for that 5 Point intersection, long time overdue. Also remind them that the streetcar is up and running and it's still a free ride, which also adds a lot of value to what's happening on Beatty's Ford Road that's not listed on the presentation. Historic Excelsior Club, right? And so there's a lot of beautiful pictures circling on internet now in terms of what it's going to look like. How close are we to actually making that a reality? I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it publicly, since over the last weekend, I think everyone smiled when I said the beautiful pictures that are all over social media. So help me understand, where are we in those discussions?
So we have periodic check-ins with the developer, following along kind of what are their conversations in and around the city. So for example, I know that they had some conversations with planning about some of the building, the setbacks, things like that. And I know that Allison, not to put you on the spot, but y'all were working through some of that with them. We're kind of tracking what are the big issues for them. The one that continuously comes up is around the parking. And how do we solve for the parking at this site? I think that potentially there's some long-term solves for that developer, but in order to kind of get things moving, there's a short-term solve. So we've got to figure out, and that's probably what I'll say again for our side is the biggest.
And are those conversations going on in conjunction with the other project going, Oak Line and Beatty Ford Road, the William Hughes project, because they're both have the same issues?
They're both after the same issues, yeah.
Although-
So we're keeping both of those in mind when we're looking at it, is can we find a place
Solve both.
to solve both? Yeah, it's not
Okay.
just a one or the other.
Okay. I'll leave the strategic land acquisition alone, but that may also be a part of the parking issue, right?
Yeah.
I would hope so at some point, because.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, but I just think that Beatty's Ford Road is a blueprint, and as the chairman and the district rep, I think we need to pivot at some point, right, to other sections of the city. And every corridor is different needs, different desires, different stages of development in terms of where they are. Beatty's Ford Road, for a number of reasons, were significantly ahead of others. But this is a great start there, and if we can do it here, we can do it throughout the city, so.
And that's a great point, Councilmember Graham. You know, first of all, it's really easy to identify projects and say, let's go do them, or let's go invest in them. But as you know, there's just a tremendous amount of work after that fact. And so what we've been trying to figure out again is how do we keep that going? How do we keep you all reminded? When I talk about this intersection of Beatties Ford and LaSalle, you know, one of the E-Fix projects is up, Chase Bank is out there. You can see that, but the infrastructure and the pedestrian improvement projects haven't started yet. So it's easy to kind of see us package it all and then forget that all these pieces are in the works and coming. But we also have to find ways that we can pivot to other corridors, keep these projects going, pick up more projects, and even be able to be in a position to come back to Beatties Ford when different opportunities arise as well. So,
Last question, how's the Urban Maine initiative going? And it's been kind of quiet on that front.
well, I'm going to let Erin speak to that. She knows it the best. Again, it's great to have everybody in the room today. Erin, you want to give a couple of updates on that? Yeah. Come on up.
So we have, it may have seemed quiet so far, but we're really gearing up. The main focus of the Urban Maine program right now is the IncDev small-scale real estate development training. We had a couple free sort of like intro lectures, one in November and then just one a few Saturdays ago in February. And the next step in that training is their first full seminar on really just the ABCs of being a small-scale real estate developer. That is coming up on March 26th on that Saturday morning. It's a virtual session. There's information on the website, so they are actively promoting that, marketing that opportunity, and that all builds on a couple sessions up to a virtual small-scale developers boot camp. And so the Urban Maine team and the partner organization, HWEP, has been really doing a lot of work trying to get people recruited into that program.
And lastly, and I'm asking questions I already know the answer to, but I'm doing it for the sake of the committee so they can have a clear understanding what's happening on each and every quarter, so that when we move forward, they can know what's happening. Cure Violence, we have a new team there. Can someone talk to the new team and how that's going?
On Cure Violence, I don't think we have anybody in here that can talk to the new team. I need to pull either Julia in on that one. But we have tried to stay close to them, right? How is this work and that work? And that'll get to a little bit of when we talk about internal structure, so that we can all be informed on all of that.
And just for the committee members, again, Cure Violence is the approach that the council initiated to combat crime and violence in the area, making sure that we talk to those individuals, have people on the streets, boots on the ground, talking to neighbors, residents, centers of influence along the Beatties Ford Road corridor in terms of curtailing the crime in the area. A new team has been in place. They're doing a great job thus far. So it's approached, as Tracy said earlier, of the whole. It's economic development, it's public safety, it's Wi-Fi, it's all those things working together to create a livable and a functional corridor. So I think that's important to mention as well.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we pivot to Mr. Phipps?
Mr. Chairman, it's Ed.
Oh, Ed, I'm sorry. Phipps, then Ed, you'll be second. I think you're second in queue, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Phipps, Greg?
I think you might have, I guess, answered some of my questions. I had a question about the strategic land acquisition, but it looks like, is that going to be devoted mostly to parking? As I was interested in how many acres and what we had in mind for it. But is parking primarily going to be the focus or what?
So, Councilmember Phipps, we are actively looking at several parcels that could have different uses for us, from housing to commercial to small business to parking. And so, as we kind of determine whether or not we think these are good acquisitions, we would bring them forward to you all to talk a little bit more about a specific parcel and then what we thought the appropriate use would be for. So we're working through all that now, but I put it on there because we've heard it come up over the years, and I wanted you all to know that it's something that we're actively working on and getting a couple of parcels in various corridors under contract.
And Greg, every corridor is uniquely different, so I threw out the parking on Batesford Road, which is the lower end of Batesford Road, i.e. Batesford Road and Oak Lawn, because I know that's been a major topic of discussion for the last year and a half. The other side of Batesford Road may be something totally different. It may be land acquisition for affordable housing, right? And so every corridor is uniquely different and may have a different usage for the land. But the bigger picture is we got to have land control.
Right. Okay, my last question has to do with the item at the far left end of this slide, talking about ADA improvements. It's my understanding that I thought, aren't we doing ADA improvements all across the city? So this is nothing specific or germane just to the corridors, right?
Right, no, and you are correct. We incorporated that in as part of the infrastructure project to go ahead and make sure that we were making the appropriate ADA improvements for this intersection. And it's really between this intersection as well as Catherine Simmons in between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to say I'm pleased to see that we're not assuming away parking entirely and recognize that there is still a need for parking. So I'm in support of that. I am interested to know what resources we're putting into these corridors and how that lines up with the established commitment we have. So are we going to see a breakdown of these priorities alongside the portions of our overall corridor commitment that they represent?
I can try to pull some numbers for you when we get a little bit closer to the end. I think Todd has some numbers within the corridor commitments that we've had. And just to remind everybody, last budget year, it was 24.5 million. Of that, 14 million was CIP. This year was another 14 million, 7 for housing and 7 for economic development. And then the look to do another 10 million in CIP in this next bond cycle.
Right. I'd be interested to see a little more of the breakdown if we can develop that. And my other question was, given that these corridor funds were part of our commitment to the mayor's initiative on race, is there anything in the governance structure of that initiative, as announced in the memo from Chairman Coley, that suggests particular uses for any of these corridor funds, or that involves other people in deciding how they're going to be used?
So I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. When I have,
Okay.
It's not just the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative. We've got a lot of different initiatives that are focusing on corridors. And I can kind of just at a very high level walk you through where everybody is and how they're thinking about it.
Right, but I just remind you that the announcement about the race initiative identified essentially all our corridor money as being part of the 250 million. So technically, it's all subject to whatever arrangements we have with our partners in the initiative.
Yep. Yep.
We're going to discuss that towards the end, and I got a whole lot to say about that too. So
All right, thank you.
That will be a very great conversation, much needed conversation for sure.
Thank you.
Okay,
Ready to go into West Boulevard?
let's do it.
Great. One more slide, please. So for West Boulevard and Beatty's Ford were in similar situations because a lot of planning work and community engagement had occurred. So it was pretty easy for us to come in and start to look at the properties and the projects that were in front of us with that. So we focused on 2 intersections initially, I will say that the Clanton Road intersection is another one that we're spending a lot of time on between Three Sisters Market, the YMCA, and just some momentum that is happening there. And Behringer Drive, which is near the interchange, we really have looked at the underneath 77, the underpass, and lighting and art. What can we do with that interchange to make it more inviting and safer? For Remount, we've done a street eats. We're working on intersection enhancements, as well as working closely with the new owners of the City West Market, which is where the Jack in the Box, the boarded up Jack in the Box sits in the corner. And so that property has changed hands in the past several months. And we've jumped in quickly to try to work with those new owners on not just the small businesses that are there, but also the Jack in the Box. We're also looking at new bus shelters. This one has property acquisitions for Remount. I will say that one of the properties we have under contract is the federally seized property. Councilmember Watlington had some real concerns about that, and we have put that under contract. Don't know if we'll move forward on it. We're analyzing it, doing our due diligence now. But that was one of the ones where the property itself was a problem for the community, and we wanted to take that. We also see it as potentially a really good opportunity for small business. And new and growing small businesses to come into the corridor. And then corridor-wide, we're looking at a public safety master, or public space, master plan, as well as free public Wi-Fi, developing a merchants association, and then the ongoing work with Three Sisters Market and business matching grants, and then also working with the West Boulevard Neighborhood Coalition in capacity and support. So, questions on West Boulevard?
Has Councilmember Wallington made it yet?
Hi there. Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon. I did not get to catch the whole presentation, but I am.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we were talking about you and your district, and wanted to make sure that you had any comments, questions, or input that you want to give to the balance of the committee. What we're doing is walking through all the corridors. We started with Baysford Road, now we're pivoting to you, so that the membership can have a feel for what's happening over there as it relates to the corridors of opportunity. And Tracy did a good job just kind of outlining where you are in terms of some of the initiatives that you've been participating with since last year, and I think doing a really, really good job.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, based on what I'm seeing here, I was out in the community this morning talking to some local business owners, and people are really excited about the possibilities as it relates to the Merchant Association. It's something that's been burning for a long time on this side of town. And so I'm happy to see that is in progress with some timing. As it relates to the other in-process components that are really infrastructure driven, I'm excited to see that those are in the queue. I know that some of those items like the I-77 underpass, like the new bus shelters, those are things that are tangible improvements to the area that people need, that are using our transit systems. And so I'm happy to see that. And I think it's going to build a lot of momentum for folks as we go into the next round of work, particularly the Three Sisters Market. So I know that meetings have been ongoing, understanding what that's going to take. And so definitely am excited about that and am close to that one, because we all understand that food access is of primary importance on our corridor. And as we think about moving down the corridor and strategically acquiring land, definitely gives us an opportunity to implement more of the playbook. So thank you so much for the work, and I look forward to continuing.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any additional questions? Greg, you're up.
This is the second time that I noticed we got a category called street eats. What clarification, what is that, street eats? What is that?
Monica, you want to come talk about street eats? That was your baby.
Come on down.
We did it during, as part of the first round of federal funding for the Recovery Act. And it was basically a combination of food trucks and local restaurants. We did about 16 across the city, where we would set them up, outdoor dining, and then restaurants could either deliver or have food trucks there that would deliver food. And so depending on the location, depended upon whether it was like a one-day event or kind of multi-event. The one in West Boulevard was over, I believe, 3-4 weeks' time. So it lasted, and we would have food trucks out there occasionally through that time. So it ended as part of the end of that funding cycle at the end of last year.
And Councilmember Phipps, we use was it the kickoff for Street Eats?
Yeah.
For that property, we use it as the corridor kickoff, as a kickoff for Street Eats. Brought in food trucks, also celebrated the City West Market, or City West Commons. I always say it backwards. Has small kitchens in a rehabbed building, and so it's a great way to celebrate some of those small businesses that were coming into the corridor as well. So it was a little bit of a combo between the two, but something that was really good at getting the community engaged.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
all right.
So if we go to the next slide, this is the last slide I had on West Boulevard. I'm not sure if Councilmember Watlington heard me say it before, but I want to just reiterate it since she's listening, which was this is Remount and West Boulevard. We're looking at what would be the Jack in the Box location, and we are actively working with that property owner on how can we partner to do something with, a building that's right now boarded up and a little bit of an issue. And I will say, one of the great things and kind of a little bit of this different take on how we're looking at corridors has been the collaboration between you guys and us. You're great. We have so many staff from various departments that are engaged with the community and bring opportunities up, but you guys too bring up opportunities of whether you talk to somebody or whether you hear a community concern, and being able to kind of have that system in place where the dialogue is going both ways has been really good, and so we appreciate that with you all. Let's move on to Sugar Creek. And so Sugar Creek last year, did a playbook process or design sprint, I think we will, and identified several priorities within the corridor of what to focus on. Like I said, what's been a little bit different now has been, okay, how do we take all of those recommendations and all of those thoughts and organize them in an implementation strategy that leads to the real change that we want to see? We can't, as we all know in these processes, we can't jump to the end. We can't have new development when we have, crime and public safety as a primary issue, or things, we can't just jump to the end, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so with taking what we got out and we learned in the playbook is really developing an implementation strategy that makes sense, that the community sees input, and we continue to build trust with the community. And so I'll give you the example. I've asked some hard questions as it relates to public safety in Sugar Creek is how do we solve this? And a lot of the conversations we've had have been like, it's a really expensive solve. And if you talk to CMPD, they'll say, we've been trying to solve it since the 90s. And it's like, okay, well, let's take price tag off of it. I know y'all don't like to hear me say that. But, what is the solve, right? Let's don't avoid it because it's expensive. Let's really figure out what is the solve that's going to move the needle. Now, we might not be able to do it, but really starting to say, okay, if this is identified as a key priority, what are going to be our strategies? In the meantime, we can do some things like cameras and lighting to improve safety. But let's have a longer term strategy as well. And we don't always get to those when we when we have the playbook process or design sprint. We have to have additional dialogue after the fact, I think. So you'll see here on the priorities that came out, like I said, now the focus really is what is the right order of implementation? How do we best utilize our dollars as well as potentially other dollars that might be out there to move this corridor forward.
Can I ask a question? I kind of know the geography for Baysford Road. I know it for Victoria's district. So what area are we talking about on Sugar Creek?
So for Sugar Creek, you're talking about essentially from North Tryon and Asian Corners all the way up to the interchange and up to Derrida.
Okay, okay.
Now, those are, again, if you had to do the geographic focus, here we go. You've got those kind of 3 points along the way. I will say that a large amount of our conversations, as we start to think about the implementation, are trying to hit all 3 areas, but obviously the interchange is the big kind of question mark that we've been trying to say, okay, what is the right order to do things? What are the things that need to, that really need to occur in what particular order?
So we're this Asian market, and then there's the I-85 interchange, and goes all the way to Derrida?
To up to Derrida, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And
all 3 are different.
they're very different, right? They're very different, and I think you'll see, you know, it's not dissimilar from like the conversations we've had on Beatty's Ford. The conversations that we have at North Tryon and Asian Corners, you know, there's market momentum there. There's development pressures there. How do we get what we want to see based on what we know out of the playbook process?
Gotcha.
85, there's a lot of issues to solve. And that's a different level of investment, a different type of investment. And then Derrida is different too, has, you know, different needs in their area. So again, how can we come up with strategies? But we will start to build out the same matrix that you saw in the last 2 quarters. You'll start to see that for Sugar Creek. And then the next one we'll go to is Albemarle. And these matrices will just continue to grow, right? If you think about it, every time we come, the list gets longer. And that's why I keep emphasizing we have to figure out internal capacity to stay on top of this. If we can go to the next slide. So as I said, Albemarle will be the next corridor to release its playbook. Next slide, please. Aaron led with the city team the playbook process and is just starting to wrap that up now. Some of the big ideas that came out of that is leveraging the international food presence, obviously improving pedestrian and cycling and transit accessibility, reinvigorating the retail centers, and exploring additional small business support programs. And then what are some partnership opportunities that we could have to fund some of these key strategies? So we can't forget in Albemarle and Central, Eastland is kind of our catalyst for that. And so a lot of the conversations we've had with Aaron and team have been, how do we grow from Eastland, right? How do we let some of this, the focus has been so much on Eastland, how do we let this grow out into the corridor? Again, so you start to see a different place. We start to celebrate beyond the borders of just Eastland, this international food presence, and support that as something that is growing. And then obviously pedestrian and infrastructure improvements are really important there.
Okay. Who's the lead agency or organization over there that's kind of helping them oversee some of, everyone's smiling, right? Because,
I don't know that there's a lead.
well, and that's my point, right? It goes back to the conversation we've been having the last couple of weeks in reference to the market and who's on first, who's on second, what they know, when they knew it, where they're going, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so because, you know, Beatty's Ford Road certainly has advocacy. I know Victoria's District has the same thing. We know who the folks are on Sugar Creek, but who's kind of leading and steering over there?
So one thing before Aaron gets into it, so 2 perspectives, because Todd might have some as well going through the Eastland project, because it was really difficult to kind of balance what everybody wanted or didn't want on that site, and then jumping into the playbook process from
And
there.
they got the most potential than anyone else, I believe, in terms of really creating an international corridor. I mean, I think it's just full of potential, but someone has to lead. So who's leading?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the approach and implementation for each corridor is a little different. So that the community side here is a little bit different as well. We've really been working with 3 groups that are really consortiums of different neighborhood associations, as well as some of the local smaller chambers of commerce, really leaning a lot on the small business organizations, and some of the other like more cultural organizations versus something that's, you know, strictly neighborhood association.
Exact. So in the old Chamber of Commerce days, they had regional chambers. Is there like a regional, I mean, I guess there's a lot of moving parts over there, right? Neighborhood organizations, cultural organizations, business organizations, but I'm not sure that everyone's talking the same love language.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we work with the Latin American Coalition, the Latin American Chamber of Commerce, the Asian American Chamber of Commerce, a lot of the different business groups. So there's maybe a lot more people at the table, but we're starting to figure out how we really connect and work together. And that's built into some of the big ideas too, is more community connections and partnerships.
Okay.
And I think you raised a good point where there are a lot of different groups out there. And, you know, from the old aspect where you had a east region for the Chamber of Commerce, you don't really have that anymore. So I think something that the playbook helps out, and some of the things we've been doing is helping organize a lot of those different groups, bringing those interests to the table to make sure that there's nobody that's not left behind, and that everybody is kind of coordinating and talking together. Because if you go out there on Albemarle, it's a melting pot, and a lot of them are engaging with each other, but maybe not on certain things that we can actually help bring them together a little bit more. And there's a lot of different neighborhoods. The land use patterns in the East Charlotte's a lot different than it is in West Charlotte. So, you know, some neighborhoods are cut off from other neighborhoods just because of just the development patterns. So how do we get those consortiums together and more engaged and feel like they have a seat at the table and like they're being listened to more than we have in the past?
Gotcha. Any questions, committee members? I'm
Yes. Yes, Mr. Graham.
Welcome.
Thank you. My hand has been up for a while. Couple of comments on Sugar Creek and Albemarle. So as our staff mentioned, we do have very strong neighborhood organization on the east side who has been advocating for a catalyst of Eastland redevelopment and business support for a while. We also have Latin American and Asian American Chamber of Commerce who've been working around the clock to provide business support to existing business owners there. So what I would like to see is partnership with those organizations and major concerns that have come up in past 6 months to a year where displacement of existing business owners because of the new growth that we are seeing, the new opportunities. We got to ensure that we are not displacing the existing business owners that makes this place so unique, including the open air market. I know we have had a vendor with the open air market who has had direct partnership with the city. But we do need to find solution for these business owners, and a lot of them did speak at our public forum. And it's unfortunate that it has taken some of these business owners to come to public forum to find a retail space. So I hope to see some solutions here and make that a part of the catalyst that Eastland redevelopment is. I mean, they have done business in this space for far too long, have really provided opportunities. Some of these are immigrant-owned business owners, and they're not asking for handout. All they're asking is really hand up. And I know that we have allocated some funding in our Eastland redevelopment towards incubator sort of space, and we got to figure out how we can use some of that space and public dollars that we have allocated for this project towards supporting existing business owners that are currently operating there. Because they are the ones who have brought traction and opportunities to that part of our city, and we need to continue to make sure that they are not being left out of this redevelopment opportunity. And on Sugar Creek, there have been some safety concerns that have come up. I know that Officer Ramsey, CMPD Officer Ramsey, has been working with Asian American business owners, but that has come up many times. So I look forward to hearing some of the strategies that we have to support our existing business owners and address some of the safety concerns that they have raised.
Thank you, Council Member. I agree with you 100% in terms of what needs to happen around the Albemarle Road area. We need to ensure that everybody's there at the takeoff versus the landing. That would help everybody out, right? And even some of the strategies that you just talked about in terms of, and that community will change, and there's no doubt about it, is keeping the retail leasing rates affordable for those guys. That's going to be the challenge, especially once we get the practice facility up and operating. I mean, we don't want to lose any of that. I think, like I said earlier, I think this quarter has probably more potential than all of them because it's such a unique feel for the city, and every part of the city doesn't have to look or feel the same. This should be uniquely different, and so I just hope that I could work with you, Dimple, and others really to make sure that folks know what we're doing, when we're doing it, why we're doing it, and that we can get them at the takeoff. It'll be a lot easier.
So just a couple things I'll add to that. We'll talk more about Eastland tonight.
Okay.
More specifically, what's on the site right now. We will have, once we put a shovel in the ground on Eastland, we have 18 to 24 months of construction. We did, just to remind everybody, build in a way to protect small businesses and bring in small businesses in the community. We haven't yet started working on, because of the construction for the infrastructure, we haven't started working on what that mix looks like. But we definitely heard the open air market last week, the speakers, the concern around the market. And so we are considering a couple of different approaches with that. And we'll hit a little bit more on that tonight.
Okay, cool. I'm very interested, and I think certainly I know Dimple's been doing a lot of work over there as well.
Yes.
Okay, let's move it. Any other questions? Greg, you're up.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, before we leave that Sugar Creek corridor, I'm still concerned that I don't know that there seems to be some confusion in the community in my discussions with leaders in the Hidden Valley area, whereas there was a flurry of activity early on. I don't know that there's been some changes in the city that they've been working with, but I'm curious as to, do we think that they are as far along as they should be in this process? I mean, in as much as their playbook is still in draft form, and plus, I think that the scope of the corridor has changed a couple of times. I mean, it used to be focused on the interchange and Sugar Creek and Reagan Drive, but now it seems like it has morphed over to the Asian corners and even up to DeRuyter. So I'm wondering if those shifts in the scope of the corridor has really impacted their ability to be on track at this point. I know they have a lot of nuisance type businesses in the area in the form of a cluster of hotels there. And, and I haven't really heard anything as in regards to any strategic acquisitions to get rid of some of those nuisance properties. But I'm wondering, I get the feeling that we're not where we need to be or should be at this point in this corridor process in that Sugar Creek corridor. Now, I want to know, are my feelings, do you agree with that or not?
So, Councilmember Phipps, what I would say, if there's a cog in the wheel, it's me. Because I've been very vocal internally about, while we have recommendations, we have to think through a lot of the recommendations, right? So take a hotel acquisition. We have money, we could go out and try to acquire a hotel right now, but there's people that are living in those hotels. And so what is our strategy for that? What is our strategy going to be once we purchase the hotel? The last thing I want to put the city in the position of is purchasing something we don't have a strategy for it. And then we're the bad guys, right? Because we were kicking people out who were actually living there. And so really trying to think through with the team, you take the recommendations and then what is the right order of implementation? The other piece, especially for Sugar Creek, the conversations have been about what are the other partners? What is the other money that is out there potentially that we that we could team up with. If you look at a hotel acquisition and you look at the dollars that we really have for land acquisition, that could eat up everything. So is there a private sector partner to work with on that? Don't know. So admittedly, things have not moved as fast, but I think it's not out of a lack of work that's not happening. Work is happening, but I think it's much more about making sure that we are making the right investments or we're leveraging other dollars that might be out there to make investments.
And I'll just add your comment about the change in scope or geographic area. In 2020, the design sprint was focused on that Sugar Creek 85 area, that interchange area that you spoke to earlier. And when that was completed, one of the recommendations from that process was to create a playbook process, which by that nature of that, it was sort of an evolution of that initial work effort. And that's when the scope of work for Sugar Creek expanded from Derita to the North Tryon area and expanded that corridor study area. Also out of that decision sprint from 2020 was about how do we increase or enhance lighting to improve public safety? And how do we partner with some of the business owners to start incorporating some of the cameras and getting them connected to CMPD's monitoring center? So there are some things that have been happening or underway from that 2020 design sprint that evolves into the playbook, and we're not doing them as a critical path. We're doing everything simultaneously. And so we're trying to do everything incrementally as we come along.
And I know the policing efforts on the corner of 85 certainly is ongoing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of attention from CMPD with the hotels and the public safety efforts, and things are happening around those areas. So those things are ongoing. But like you, Greg, I just think we need to, kind of change the gas from regular to premium, right? And see if we can move it along. And like I said, every quarter is different. Every hurdles are higher. That's a high hurdle for sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we pivot? I'm trying to see if we can make up some time.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So if we go to the next slide, this is just a little bit about how we are trying to advance all of the corridors and giving you a little bit of a look of kind of how we're thinking about it, right? So we talked about last year, Beatty's Ford, West Boulevard, a lot of work was done there while 85 Sugar Creek and Central engagement was occurring. Now we're in FY22. We're really thinking about what are the implementation strategies around Sugar Creek and Central and Albemarle, while we think about how are we kicking off North Tryon and North Graham and Freedom and Wilkinson. And so you can see kind of how it progresses through. I know that the North Tryon, North Graham communities are anxious for us to start that process. Again, I will own the fact that I am the cog in the wheel because I want to make sure that we're asking the right questions and we're having the right conversations when we go out there. I've actually had somebody in the North Tryon say, well, we have a list of projects, we all have money, we'll just give you the list of projects. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't get us where we need to go. We need to be thoughtful about how we want to do this. Again, because every corridor is different. North Tryon, North Graham has unique opportunities and different challenges. And so I want to make sure that we're positioned correctly before starting on that one.
And that's in my district too, so I'll kind of pivot to that for 2022.
Great.
Stay tuned. Okay.
I know it's coming.
Yes.
So let's.
It's Victoria?
Yeah, sorry, I raised my hand on the virtual just now, but I didn't know if you were monitoring that. That's why I spoke out of turn. But,
No worries.
I did want to ask about that, Tracy, and you may have mentioned it, but I just want to be very clear. I totally respect and understand the need to be strategic about the projects. But given that there are projects and there is money, what needs to happen to be able to close that gap to get into implementation more quickly?
Well, I think with all of them, one, we're trying to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how we're spreading money out, right?
Yeah.
And that we're leveraging the projects that make the most sense. We're not trying to sit on the money by any means. We're trying to get it out, but at the same time, make sure that we're doing something. We're not investing in something that might be gone in a short amount of time, or from like an infrastructure improvement, or even We've talked about some easy wins with like placemaking opportunities. But do we want to be making placemaking opportunities when we have big security or in public safety issues? Those are the kind of things we're just toggling back and forth on. I think that you'll start to see as we start to talk about a new structure, and getting to the new structure, I think you'll start to see more projects come into the mix, and the implementation strategies for both Sugar Creek and Central and Avamont.
So just so I make sure I'm articulating the gap. The gap is right now assessing whether or not these projects that have been lifted up need to be executed or are the biggest bang for the buck. And so there's a prioritization conversation happening, or is the conversation around how do we make sure that we're doing this thoughtfully? I just want to make sure I understand. Is it about scope or is it about timing?
It's what my focus has been on a lot of this is there's a lot of potential projects that come out. What are the ones that make the most sense, right? And again, there's no intention of trying to slow play it, but making sure that the investments we're making are the right investments, because there's way more potential investments than there is money. And so I want to make sure that we're making the investments that are going to actually move the communities forward the way that they want. If we take the recommendations out of the playbook and just put our resources on a couple of them, from given the dollars that we have, I want to make sure that the communities are going to see that impact. And so it's more about the prioritization of them based on where the communities are right now.
And do you have the timing on, or what does it take to get to a prioritized list?
Well, I think that you saw us with Beatty's Ford and West Boulevard, right? We started to push some projects out. So now we're at a place with Sugar Creek and Central as the playbooks are winding down to really come up with those implementations. So you should start to see projects out of those come forward very quickly. North Tryon and Graham and Freedom and Wilkinson will be a little bit longer.
I'll ask this again next month.
All right, let's pivot.
All right, let's talk about the structure. And so, let's go to the next slide. We've talked about the need to make sure that we are looking collectively at the investments that are being made in the corridors, whether they're ours or others are making them, and how are we best collaborating with those investments and leveraging the opportunities that are really there. And so, that's a lot more coordination, I think, that has to happen internally as well as externally. And as I said in the beginning, it's hard to kick off 2 corridors, do 2 more playbooks, do an implementation strategy, and keep it going. And so I'm trying to look towards next year and the year after when we have 6 corridors in play, and we're trying to deliver a series of projects on all of these corridors, and we're still picking up more projects on corridors, right? More opportunities come along.
Is there a corridor lead for every corridor? Is there one person that?
Yes and no. The way that we've operated is it's kind of been a team effort with maybe a lead on the playbook process, but then we kind of hand off. And we also hand off to specific areas. So if there's an infrastructure project that goes into infrastructure, you do that project. And Todd, Monica, Aaron, you guys are in the implementation kind of piece of it, as well as the playbook piece. I think where you're going to see where we're trying to go is get a little bit more consistent about having a corridor ambassador for each corridor that can kind of look at the work that's being done, be there during the playbook process, but also all the way through. Do y'all have any insights on kind of how it's run,
I would just add that, we're set up really well right now to look at the strategies, assess where we are today, look at the strategies, how do we get to where we want to go, and identify where we want to go. Where we're not currently set up well is how do we actually implement all of these at the same time? And we just don't have the capacity, the resources, or the structure internally or externally to address all of the projects, all of the initiatives that could come out of these strategies and figure out how to get them done in a timely manner. And some of the funding that's out there, whether it's ours or partner organizations, is really supportive. But if we don't have the capacity and resources to really drive that home and deliver, then we need to do this a little bit differently than we currently have.
Okay, well, let's talk about that offline. I think there may be some value in that. right? Because like Victoria indicated with her last question, if there was someone kind of, huh? We're getting to it? Okay, I'm jumping the agenda, okay. All right, continue.
Next slide, please.
So, but we're thinking alike, right?
Yeah, we are. So this graphic is a little bit hard to read, and this is just a draft, right? I wanted to get something for everybody's feedback out there sooner rather than later, because a group of us have been talking about this for some time now, and now we've got to figure out what works. And so we had transition internally with both Taiwo and Pam leaving, and, trying to get Sean and Rebecca on the housing side, Allison on the planning side, integrated into the corridors work. And so we took that as an opportunity to kind of say, okay, wait, let's stop and look at this, because we know the workload is growing. How are we going to continue to be able to deliver? And so what the circle at the top looks at is you basically have 3 positions that are surrounded by the directors and communications. It's a program manager that is thinking strategically about all 6 of the corridors. It's an operations person that's focused on the implementation, right? Not down in the weeds of one, but just kind of across the board implementation. And then how are we keeping the community engaged, right? So it's not the community engagement person is in all 6 corridors. They're thinking more about how are our ambassadors, which is one kind of designee for each quarter, keeping that engagement going, right? How are we delivering? How are we communicating with you all? And then they're getting supported by corporate communications as well as the directors. I'm not saying that these are brand new positions. The budget director, I think, would crucify me if I said they were new positions. But I am saying that at this point, is there a way that we positionally, in talking to the manager as well, reshuffle the deck? Right? I even suggested, do we have the program manager sitting in the manager's office, right? So that we are intentionally doing that cross collaboration. We're going from something that's kind of horizontal now to something that is extremely horizontal. And then you can see in every single corridor, then you have all of those departments that are still having to do the work in there. And, again, it's a different way of doing it. Right now, you have the 4 department directors that are coming together. You have a liaison kind of between department directors and corridors. And then you have implementation teams that I think you all overlap into on each corridor. And people have their specific areas of work. So we're trying to get to a way that you get some people that can just sit and be strategic about the work across all the corridors. About the implementation across all the doors, about the metrics for success for all the corridors, and then really boots on the ground with specific projects within the corridors.
Okay.
Any thoughts, reactions?
Thoughts, reactions from the committee?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Okay, I just want a couple of questions. So the first question is the difference between this program manager role and this operations role. I heard you say the operations role is more about implementation, but not in the weeds. How do those 2 differ?
I think program manager, to me, in my mind, is more about the implementation strategy, right? How are we figuring out the implementation strategies for each corridor and keeping that going? How does our implementation strategy potentially connect with what's happening with other entities that are investing in the corridors, which will be the next slide? The operations person, in my mind, is kind of constantly thinking at a high level, all of the various projects, are they being delivered on time? It's more of how are we, the city, operating within what we're trying to implement. Does that make sense?
So is the idea that the program manager is external, I think.
Oh, we lost you. I couldn't hear that question.
I said, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're kind of coming in and out, but go ahead.
I said, is the idea that the program manager is externally facing?
You're sounding like a robot, so we can't hear you.
Okay, come back to me.
Okay. Text it to me, I'll ask it for you. Greg?
Yeah, I like the structure. It seems to me that it's probably is something that maybe we should have implemented earlier in the process.
I'm building this plane as I'm flying it, Councilmember Phillips.
Yeah,
I mean, hindsight's 2020.
we've been doing this for about a year and 2 years now, right? And so we are, and it's growing.
Yeah.
Right, and so, and I'm not trying to get too deep in the weeds of how they do their work, other than the fact that I would love to call someone and say, hey, tell me what's going on North Tryon on Graham Street, and hold that person accountable.
Well, and that's kind of where we got to with the ambassador. Again, we found that like pieces of work were kind of being passed off, that there's consistency. Like you guys know all the corridors, but who's doing what in that one call? And part of this too came from watching how the community engages with the city, right? So if a lot of community leaders know the various departments, so what they'll do is they'll call the various departments, hey, come out for this, come out for that. And all of a sudden, we're all looking at each other saying, what's going on? You know, why are we duplicating efforts? So the idea is that the community needs to have that one person for a corridor to go to. And we kind of need to have that one person in a corridor that kind of knows everything that's happening.
Okay, so Victoria Winston, I'm sorry, go ahead, Greg. Just for those
So the community liaisons, are they the ambassadors?
The existing community liaisons?
Yeah.
Potentially. I mean, part of the conversation we're having now internally is trying to say, where do these people sit? Where do they exist? Where do they, you know, I mean, how do they're kind of already there. It's just how do we maybe allocate some of their time and how they're doing it. You might have community liaison that's on multiple communities right now. Do we bring that to one, right? Or I don't know. And we're looking at, again, open positions, all of that kind of stuff, and how can we get creative to restructure this differently? You notice this does not sit in a department. So it's different for us too, that it's not trying to be something that we're trying to build out in a department. It's trying to be something that's bigger than any one department.
Okay, so Greg, are you done?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Wallington wanted to know, is the idea that the program manager is externally facing? And why not Sherry? And from what I understand, Sherry is in budget now.
Yes, so Cherry moved over as of today. Her first day is in budget. So that's another reason why we're, you know, with all the moves between Pam and Ty, Cherry, we've used this opportunity to try to think a little bit differently about how we structure. The other thing that we found out is Cherry was one person. This is a lot of people that we're talking about, because you can't have one person trying to do all of that in every corridor. The program manager could be externally focused. That's something that we'll figure out this year with Robin. In his position is what are the long-term full-time positions that we need? So for now, for the program manager, I'm just trying to identify potentially a person. And does this organizational structure fit? And then we'll work into, okay, do they go more external? Do they go more internal? In the short term, Robin will be working between this internal as well as the external, and so will others here at the city. It shouldn't just be one person that represents corridors on the outside. But we do need one person for each corridor.
Yeah, and that's long-term. But we're right in the middle of the budget, so we plant that seed.
Yeah.
And see what happens this year or next year. All right?
And that's been the conversations with the manager, like, do you do 2 corridors and then 2 corridors and 2 corridors and grow it as the work grows?
Because you're right, every work stream that's a full-time job.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot. And to do it the way that we need to do it, I mean, it's a lot. But I think what we're trying to do here is set up for long-term success. And so that as needs grow within our community and different topics come up from time to time, we have a structure that keeps a focus in these corridors.
Okay.
All right.
Let's make up some time, Council. I'm going to make sure I'm mindful of everyone's calendar, and I know we got another presentation, and
Yes.
I know this mayor's equity thing is going to take some time too.
Yes, so next slide, please. Again, I know this is little bit hard to read, but this is the thinking of how we're starting to think about this externally, okay? And there's a lot of players to try to organize in this. It's not just the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative. There is a lot of focus and conversations externally on corridors. I will say that United Way and Laura bring together monthly a neighborhood collaborative discussion that includes a lot of people in the top box. So what I've done here is I've tried to say who is putting significant money into the corridors. And this is just an example, so this is not intended to exclude anybody or spend any other organization's money. Let me be very clear on that. But it is to say who are the groups that are putting significant investment into corridors. So with the city, we know what we're doing. The Foundation of the Carolinas is putting together the program for Wells Fargo. Brian has been running the lead on that. Brian has until I think roughly this summer to really go back to Wells to say, what is the strategy? So it's focused around small business.
So when you said a program for Wells Fargo, I want to make sure that I know.
$20 million.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I know what it is, but I just want to make sure that all the council members are.
Yes, thank
where
you.
we are.
And I'm so far in the weeds of them, so I forget
Yeah.
to say that. So, you know, the grant was awarded to Charlotte. It's going to be spent in corridors, but Brian's going to build that the same way we're building how we spend our dollars. The Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative for corridors was really two different buckets. One, it was the philanthropic dollars. And what we've looked at for that is, could we partner on things like land banking, or could we partner on public-private partnership, where we've done some in the past where we've said it's a lot of city investment. If we had another partner at the table, that bucket is, I would say, $5 to $10 million. It's not a huge bucket, but it's an opportunity to partner. Then you have the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative, which is debt and equity, and that is talking about a fund that is a revolving fund of low-interest loans. The bank, Truist and Bank of America, have been the primary ones having that conversation, but they too have to build something on what would that look like. Looking at the CDFIs in the community, or what we do and we don't have, and the ability to put small business loans and programs out into the community. United Way of the Carolinas is starting to think about more geographically focused, place-based focused investing. They'll really start thinking that through, I think, more this summer. But that's another area where investments into corridors might be coming from a different direction. And then we have the Fifth Third Bank, and they partnered with LISC, $20 million investment into the corridors that's specific to the west side, right? It's location-based. And I also put the YMCA in there because they do have facilities in several of the corridors and are rethinking how they use their facilities. I use the example of the YMCA on West Boulevard, the Stratford Richardson. The Y has talked, I know, had conversations with the Three Sisters Market. They've had conversations with Atrium. We've said, well, if everybody's coming here to do something, is there something else that's needed in this area? And so it's an example of, and again, this is just an example group. I'm sure I missed somebody, I left somebody out, but of entities that either have significant resources in corridors or putting significant resources in corridors. The important part to note in this is that each one of these would have their own individual approval processes, right? So with the city of Charlotte, if we were going to make an investment in a land acquisition, we would come to council and talk about that land acquisition. How does that investment being made? The same thing for Wells Fargo. Brian would have a stakeholder group that as they're making investments, that's what they would do. The Mayor's Racial Equity would have somehow an investments that need to be cross-checked that way, or with the revolving fund, how is that being run? So all of these have their own individual approval processes. The purpose of this governance structure with this is to make sure that everybody is talking about how they're making their investments, where they're making their investments, and maybe there's partnership opportunities, maybe there's not. But at least it's a way to keep that collaboration going, and even grow a little bit of what's already there. I mentioned the Neighborhood Collaborative, because it's really important to say that that group's been coming together for several years and talking about what's happening. And then you see, I have Robin's name on here as kind of this conduit and helping us with the external, as I'm really focused on the internal. Robin can help us with how do these work streams come together. And then you'll see work streams for each corridor again.
And Robin, again, is the new loan exec from Bank of America who was introduced himself at the beginning of our meeting.
And I should note that many of you met Corey Settles, was with us for, I think, 90 days, and Corey ended up getting an amazing job opportunity out of market, and so he is leaving the bank and going to another city. It's not uncommon of what we see these days going on.
So,
Go ahead.
so this is a lot,
Yes.
right? And so I want you to talk to me specifically like a third grader, right? And so we can make sure I know, and by extension, the committee knows and the public who's on first, who's on second, and who's on third. So public money for the quarters of opportunity is how much?
Public money for the quarters of opportunity is still the 62 million.
Approved by city council before it goes out of the door.
Right, correct.
Private money that was allocated through the mayor's racial equity program is how much?
It's targeted at about probably 25 to 30 million between those two buckets. In the processes, all of that is still being put together.
Okay. Is it fair to say that those two will work together, i.e., that the private money can start where the public money stops? Because, i.e., for an example, if there's a project going in West Boulevard or Baysford Road that we invest in, an economic development project, obviously it has to meet a public purpose, and it might be a lot easier to work with that particular vendor if there was private money involved. Is that a scenario where they would work together?
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's kind of the intent, is you have these groups, you have this team that's constantly talking, where are you making your investments? Where are the gaps? We just started with United Way, the foundation, several people from this list, a crosswalk analysis of kind of trying to keep up with who is doing what in our corridors and where are the gaps.
Okay. And so you said these entities are talking.
They are now.
They are now, right?
Well, let me rephrase that. You have groups in corridors that have been talking for years, but it's morphing, it's changing, it's evolving. The mayor's racial equity wasn't part of that conversation. The foundation might have been part of that conversation, but not from the perspective of the $20 million.
Okay. And Council members, if you have any questions, please queue yourself up and I will recognize you. Last question. You mentioned the City of Charlotte's there. Wells Fargo made their commitment. Mayor's Racial Equity Program made a commitment. When can we move from arguing about the governance in reference to actually allocating funds to folks who may be ready to take advantage of these opportunities?
I would say, I don't have a specific timeline for the mayor's racial equity on the debt and equity, because again, they're trying to build that. I will say that they are putting a tremendous amount of time to building this and thinking through that. On the philanthropic dollars, we've started to look at what are potential projects, right? What are those potential opportunities? And think through, Aaron mentioned earlier some of the work that Urban Maine's doing. Are there some potential developers out there that we want to couple with to make a project through the philanthropic dollars that came from that? Also, looking at what some of the other entities on the list are doing. Are there other partnerships, right? We might not get into it, but the LISC and Fifth Third may team up with the philanthropic dollars from the mayor's racial equity on something. So I think some are going to occur sooner rather than later. Some are still in process, and that's the almost Gantt chart, if you will, of what I'm trying to get out next.
Okay, go ahead. Mr. Driggs, floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. I have to say this is confusing, and what I'm not seeing or unable to kind of decipher is $250 million we announced, 100 million public, 150 million private, and I would like to see a breakdown against that of this so that I can somehow understand where we started. And you remember the way we started was controversial. I think we're owed a clear explanation of what has evolved. And I'm also having a hard time reconciling this with the message that was sent out by Malcolm Coley about how the race equity program was going to be managed. So I don't think we're there yet in terms of having a clear communication. It sounds at times like you're using corridors interchangeably with equity, but they aren't the same thing. And I would just like to have this simplified. I'm really having a hard time. The numbers are flying around. Now it's $25 million in the Race Equity Initiative. And I thought that was the announcement said that that was a $250 million initiative. So how do these pieces fit? There ought to be a simple explanation.
So Councilmember Driggs, what I am focused on, if you remember, the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative was four initiatives under that. It was Corridors of Opportunity, JCSU, Equity in the Workplace, and the Digital Divide. So when you hear me talk about like 25 million, that is specific to corridors. So I'm not involved with the other pieces of it. I'm simply focused here on the corridors piece of the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative.
So the description about the panel that's going to be appointed, for example, there was talk about I think after we went around with the director, they kind of changed their position and they said we're going to appoint a board of some kind, and then there's going to be an administrator, effectively. How does that tie in?
So as I said, if you look at that top box, everything in the top box would have their own individual approval processes, or I would say check in with their respective boards. So if you looked at the Mayor's Racial Equity, which are the two boxes in the middle, the two red boxes in the middle, the board that was discussed with being established, if we had projects that pulled money from the Mayor's Racial Equity, they would kind of have a process specific to the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative to go through an approval process. Just like anytime I spent any of the 62 million, I'm coming to council for an approval on that. And just going down the list, again, the Foundation of the Carolinas, they would have a stakeholder group to approve investments out of their money.
Right, but remember that the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative was a $250 million announcement. So are these other boxes in here, among which only two are the MREI, are they actually included in that $250 million number? Or are we talking about additional funds?
That's additional funds. This is specific to corridors. And so what I've been trying to use this chart for is to demonstrate that the money going into corridors is not just the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative and the City of Charlotte money. We have a lot of other money going into corridors, and that's what we have to coordinate with. So again, I'm just focused on the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative that's in corridors. I'm not focused on the other three. We're following them. We're monitoring because they could touch corridors, right? But I'm very specific to the money that was for corridors and trying to articulate how there's a lot of other entities investing in corridors as well.
So the top box, the blue box, is that the 66 million?
That would be, in this particular structure, that would be the 62 million.
62 million.
And then we know that, for example, Wells Fargo did a grant for 20 million. The Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative, I talked in the 25 million range. We know that Fifth Third did a 20 million investment into the West End.
So each of these boxes represent a commitment from those entities that will play within our corridors, right? And so that's outlined there, and we can bring back something a little bit more simplistic that kind of talks dollars. I think they want details.
Yeah, and I think that's for, again, yes, we can do that.
Yeah, yeah. So this is broader than just the mayor's racial equity. These are the various entities that are investing in our corridors, one of which is the mayor's racial equity. For an example, Fifth Third made an announcement last year specifically for Beatties Ford Road of about $20 million. And so this is kind of illustrates for the committee, the public as well as the private dollars specifically for corridors of opportunity, right? Charlotte, Wells, Mayor's Racial Equity, United Way is playing in our corridors, List and Fifth Third is playing specifically on Beatties Ford Road and the YMCA. And so they all may work with us directly or indirectly along some of the items that we talked about during the meeting, each of these 6 corridors that we've identified, right? And so the other piece, Ed, JCSU, digital divide, employment opportunities are separate and aside from what we're talking about here.
So, Mr. Chairman, it might be helpful if we had a simple Venn diagram, Mayor's Race Equity Initiative, corridors, programs, and the intersection of the two is the MREI in this box. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, we can do that. I kind of just whispered to Tracy the same thing as well. And that way you can kind of, because right now we're having like 2 different conversations, right?
Yeah.
We're having 2 conversations, both that we need to have. So I'm not running away from the other one as well. I think we do need some clarification and sunshine on the other one as well.
I mean, we've got basically $62 million that is identified as being part of this and is also identified as being part of that publicly announced race initiative. And I would just appreciate more clarity exactly on how those 2 initiatives relate.
That's fair. That's more than fair.
Thank you.
Ashmira, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I was going to ask questions around the oversight and the breakdown, but those questions have already been asked by Mr. Drake. So I look forward to some of those details and the oversight overall. Thanks.
Dimple, I got it. That was me trying to multitask. I'm sorry, Dimple. Greg. All right. Is it Greg? Yeah, Greg, floor is yours.
No, I didn't have a question, but I agree that if we could get a more simplistic breakdown of how all of these components, cash, donations supposed to work, I think that would be helpful to the broader picture of giving us a more of a complete breakdown. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, we can do that for sure. And like I said, we're having 2 different conversations, but this one is specifically for our committee and all the resources available for corridors. But I think both you and Ed make a point that we need to separate the conversations and have the bigger one later.
Yeah, and as far as the corridors go, I might be missing something, but the only corridor that I can recall out of the 6 that money, other than the city, was being devoted to was that Beatties Ford Road corridor. Am I correct on that?
Well, no. Tracy?
Yeah. Well, I would say the Wells Fargo Foundation of the Carolinas money, they're still determining will it be geographically focused or spread throughout the corridors. I think the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative is looking at the same thing, but looking at all the corridors. United Way obviously would be in all the corridors. So the Fifth Third one is the one right now, today, that is geographically focused. But you also have like the Knight Foundation investments are geographically in focus to Beatties Ford. So that's part of what we're looking at with this crosswalk that I mentioned that we're going to do, because we're trying to make sure that we can articulate back to you all, we're spreading the investments out, even though some might be targeted in one particular area or another.
And that's what, when we started last year, Greg, obviously, we started in Beatties Ford Road because in some cases, those projects were shovel-ready, and some, we created a shovel where there wasn't. Victoria was pretty long ahead with her playbook, and now we're really pivoting to the other four, specifically I-85 in Sugar Creek and North Tryon and Graham Street. So it's a whole approach, not just one. And certainly as a district rep, I've been one of the most vocal one of saying that it's time to kind of look at some other areas of the city. Yeah. All right, so I want to rush a little bit so we can make sure that we get to what I think is a very important presentation that if we don't do today, we probably won't be able to hear it until May.
Well, we can talk about that. Let's just go really quick to the last, keep going, one more? One more. That's all repetitive. Next steps, I just wanted you to see we're still, again, this is all in draft form, trying to figure out internally how we focus as well as externally how we focus, how the governance structures work for everybody, and then making sure that we're keeping that external dialogue going, right? There's a lot to build there, and then regular updates to you all. So more to come on that.
Yeah, and committee members and Ed and Greg, I get it. I concur, specifically relating to the mayor's equity program. So I'm moving from quarters and talking specifically about that. Who's on first, who's on second, what's the cost, where's the money coming from, where is it going to, where are the approval guidelines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I get it, I understand, and I'm in concurrence with you as well.
So the next item that we had on the list, and here's, I want to pose this as a question, given the time that we have, if we wanted to have Allison hit on this, or if we wanted to move this to next month. Allison, correct me if I'm wrong, it'll be May before you come back with the actual impact report analysis itself.
That's correct. I think we need a little more time with our stakeholder group, and so I think we could come back next month with a process update, and then in May for a more detailed results update to the committee, if that works for you all.
I'll defer to the committee. I know everyone has scheduled to leave at 1:30. Can we just punt the last report to be the first item on our next meeting? Is everybody comfortable with that?
Mr. Chair, I'm actually very interested to hear about this. I'm happy to meet offline and maybe get briefed on it, but I would like to learn about what we're finding out. So, and frankly, I don't think we can do justice to the topic in overtime at this meeting, but I'd rather not wait until next month to find out a little more about it.
And we are going to tap this month on the 14th with this topic, so you will hear it. You can listen to it at TAP for sure.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. All right.
Is it the same, I have a question, Mr. Chairman. So is it the same material at the TAP committee that will be presented?
It will probably be a little more detailed at TAP committee. We'll have 2 presentations at TAP and 2 presentations here for this committee.
Got it. So if we were to watch the TAP one, it would cover everything that you're going to present to this committee?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm
Since
sorry. Go ahead, Greg. Floor is yours, Greg.
Yeah, since I'm not on the TAP committee, I would appreciate, getting a notification that I can tune in on that discussion at least.
Okay. Well, I think that's consensus. I think Councilmember Wallington has already signed off. She's there. Victoria.
Here, but I'm here, but I'm fine with waiting.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm fine with it too. I just hate that you sat here and listened for an hour and a half, so I feel bad for you.
No problem. I'm involved in the corridors too, so.
Okay, so cool. All right, well, hey, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Ed, I will give you a call. I want to follow up on a couple of things. Victoria, Greg, Dimple, thank you very much for your participation. We'll see y'all next month. Take care. Bye-bye.